Perfect pitch. That's really interesting because there's two different things. There's relative perfect pitch and then perfect pitch, right? Relative perfect pitch is hearing the difference between different tones and knowing what interval that is, right? That has to do with how well you distinguish between hearing this pitch and that pitch in your brain. Perfect pitch, that's a really interesting question, and I believe that it has to do with your brain being able to interpret a sound and know what to call it exactly and know what it is. I don't know if it's inborn or whether it's trained, but some people have a much easier time of it because you've got 30,000 nerves from each ear going to different parts of your brain. So when you hear different pitches, it excites different parts of your brain. The other day I was watching I've got a German Shepherd, as I've mentioned, right? And she's got these ears that are like big ears, right? And she hears a squirrel and they go, phew, and the ears turn, right? And she gets into this mode that's instinctual. She's like got blinders on. All she's thinking about, catch the squirrel, catch the squirrel, catch the squirrel. And she goes running after the squirrel, because of course the squirrel runs away, but she's like entranced on this squirrel and watching the squirrel and wanting to get the squirrel. That's an instinctual mode, right? How can I break her of that instinctual mode? Is I usually clap my hands, scream at her, some sort of sound that's going to shake her out of that instinct. Why does that work? It works because when she hears my voice and the frequencies in my voice stimulates a different part of her brain that's not in this instinctual, repetitive, obsessive mode. And it changes her brain function slightly so she can get out of it and then realize, oh, hi, and she's back. You know what I mean? And there's an old saying, what is it, the saying, music soothes the savage beast? It's probably because music stimulates different parts of the brain, and animals with a lesser developed brain get into these modes where certain pathways of their neurons firing are just instinctual, and those are the ways that their brains work. When you exercise your brain in terms of getting stimulation, it exercises different neurons firing. When you listen to music, some people love listening to R&B. Some people love listening to rock. Some people love listening to jazz. All of those musics have different frequency emphasis. And I know music makes you feel emotion. Why? Because it stimulates different parts of your brain. So you see how this all ties together? Why it's so important to understand hearing, because you're trying to create emotion with your music. You're trying to communicate with your listener through music. I just think it's fascinating how it works. And not only the fact that certain people like different kinds of music, maybe because parts of their brain really like that better because they enjoy that kind of stimulation. So it's not just, oh, I like rock and I like jazz and, you know, my music's better than yours. And it's actually because maybe somebody gets more pleasure out of certain kinds of music in their brain sensing it. Just goes to show how it really works is it's a chemical reaction from the hairs moving in your ears. So as you get older, those hairs get less flexible. All sorts of things biologically change. That's why your hearing changes. But you can imagine how complex and developed our hearing mechanism is. It's tremendous. And it's amazing that we can hear sounds that are 0 decibels all the way up to 130 decibels, something like that, like 1/4 louder, and our hearing actually perceives those things. And we can actually, in the cochlea, unravel what frequencies are involved in a complex sound so we can actually excite different parts of our brain. So when I hear a kick drum that has an attack and it has the low frequencies, it has a lot of different frequencies in it. My brain is being excited in different areas by hearing that one sound. When I hear music, which is a combination of all those complex sounds, my cochlea is unraveling what frequencies are actually in the sound and sending it to the various parts of the brain so I can perceive it. It's pretty amazing network, you know, isn't that amazing? The bottom line is your brain gets all of this perception from what happens in each ear. And everybody's ears are a little different, so we perceive it all a little differently. But the fact is that we actually have a spectrum analyzer in our cochlea. So we analyze the spectrum of the sound that we're hearing, which leads us back to the time domain and the frequency domain description of a sound. Our ears actually use the frequency domain description of a sound, unravels a complex sound into its fundamental frequencies, and sends it to different parts of our brain at different amplitudes so we can perceive it. The interesting thing is, when you talk about animals hearing, they've got similar mechanisms, but different sizes in their ear. And that's why when we talk about dogs hearing, how they can hear so much higher than humans, it has to do with this. And I presume if you went into surgery and they actually changed the size of these bones slightly, you could actually have more sensitive hearing or less sensitive hearing. So they've done tremendous amount of work in terms of understanding hearing and being able to repair hearing. In fact, now they've got cochlear implants. So you can actually implant a cochlea, and actually people that can't hear can hear again, or at least hear some frequencies, which is tremendous to me. And I presume eventually medical science will get to the point where they can take the motion of the air through the eardrum and actually Wi-Fi it to the parts of the brain that it needs to go to. Put it in your ear, a little Wi-Fi distributor, and people that can't hear will be able to hear. I think your hearing is an amazing tool, an amazing instrument, much more than what we're going to be discussing, microphones and speakers and all that. Really just come from the same principles that our ears use, but not nearly as sensitive or as wide dynamically, being able to handle the dynamics of what our ears can or the frequencies. And I think through time, we probably take for granted certain sounds. You hear the same sound over and over, car starting, whatever, and your brain sort of interprets a little bit too, just like with sight. If you don't see the exact picture, your brain thinks it sees it exactly. That's the other thing that we have to talk about. We'll talk about how our brain perceives sound now. So now this is the actual biological mechanism by how we actually get it to our brain. Now, how do we actually perceive it? That's really critical, and everybody perceives it slightly differently. But what is important is to realize this is a really amazing tool that you have on the side of your head here.